Hello class again and welcome to this particular video, and in here we're going to be exploring interesting things involving a circle. And you remember from our previous class we explored a specific type of shape. In this case here, when I draw a shape that looks like this, you should recognize that this is indeed a circle. And when you're asked to determine various relationships between length in a circle or parts of a circle's length, there were a couple of things to keep in mind. Now, one is recognizing that the circle starting from one point all around the outer region to the place where you started is called the what? Circumference. And so the circumference, which is represented as C, is the relationship in terms of the distance around a circle. And the next relationship we talked about is from one end of the circle to the other end of the circle when it touches the midpoint here. And this length here is called the diameter, which is represented as D. And finally, half of the diameter, which is our radius, is the measurement from our center all the way down to one end of the circle, and this is represented as D. Now, take note that when you're given a circle and you're given another circle and you see that the circumference is different from the other, it shows an interesting relationship. Either compare this circle to, let's compare it to another size of the circle, which is going to represent as this. And in here, we recognize based on, let's change the color of this, make the color to be orange. And in this case, when you have the small circle to a big circle, and we are given the diameter of both circles. And so the diameter here, which is represented as, let's say this is D1, and this diameter here is represented as, in this case here, D2, we see that no matter the size of the circle with respect to the diameter, this circle here, which is represented as C for the circumference, I'll say C1 divided by D1, or the ratio between C1 and D1 here versus this circle here, whose circumference is represented as C2 and the diameter is D2, we can come to the conclusion that they are having the same ratios. So it means that the ratio between the circumference of this circle here and the diameter of this circle with that of the circumference with the diameter of this circle here is equal. So if I divide C1 by D1, the value is equal to the division between C2 and D2. And that value is represented as what? Pi. And so pi is a common value that makes C1 and D1 to be equal to C2 and D2, and pi is expressed and equal to, in this case, 3.14. And this number takes us to many things. You can determine the diameter and the radius of a circle, and you can use this to determine the area. And so this is where area comes in, where in a circle, which we're going to highlight this as blue, and so having a circle like this, we can determine various things. We can not only use our pi, which we talked about, to determine the length of various shapes. In this case, we can use pi to determine the circumference, the diameter, and the radius. And remember, to do this, we know that the circumference is equal to 2 pi r, or it is expressed as pi diameter, or pi times the diameter. But also for our diameter, remember that we can determine our specific diameter from the circumference, and in this case here, our d is equal to c over pi, or in this case, if you are asked to find the radius given the diameter, we know that our diameter is equal to 2 times our radius. And so that is another way to determine the diameter, but you see here that pi is involved in terms of determining the circumference. And finally, here is for our radius. Remember that to determine our radius, we divide our c by uh, 2 pi, and on the other side, to go from our specific diameter to our radius, we divide, or in this case, get an eraser, we get this out of the way. We have our specific r to be equal to, in this case, d, which is our diameter, divided by 2. So these are the interesting formulas that you need to remember. You'll have a couple of examples where you'll be given one variable and you'll be asked to find the unknown variable based on the question that is given. And remember how this is important in determining the length of a specific part of a circle. And so the other one or way by which you can use pi, take note that our first way of determining pi, of using pi specifically, is to determine the length of a circle part. Now, the other way is by doing what we call area. And so area is a big thing. And take note that to find the area of a specific shape, it means that you're determining the space that is covered by the specific shape. So the inside space that is occupied by this whole shape is known to be called the area. So remember that for sure. And remember that to determine the area of this shape, in this case a circle, we know that A, which is represented as area of a circle, we need our specific pi, which we know is 3.14 times the square of our radius. And so what do I mean by square? It means that I'm multiplying my radius by itself once, which means radius times radius, and then your answer, you multiply it by pi. And what do I mean by radius? Remember that radius is the distance from the midpoint of this circle to the outer line of this circle, or to the circumference, or one end of the circumference of the circle. That is one thing to remember, which is represented as r. So r here is the same thing as what you see right in here. And to go from our radius, remember that back to determine our radius from the area, all we do is the other way around. Remember that to do that, we have to do a couple of things. We have to undo. So if you're given the area, it means that our area in this case is all going to be divided by, take note of our, divided by our pi, and then we do the square root, because square, the opposite of square is square root. And so all these are found in your calculator. So if you're given the area of a circle and you're asked to determine the radius, you have to do the area divided by the square root, divided by pi, or square root, and you'll be able to determine the radius. And from the radius, you can determine the diameter. And you know that the diameter in this case is, in this case, 2 times our radius. So therefore, 2 times the radius, after you found it from the area, you can determine the diameter. And from the radius, you can also determine the circumference of the circle, which is 2 pi times the radius, and you'll be able to find the circumference of a circle. So this is the interesting relationships in here concerning circle, not only in terms of the length, but also in terms of the area of the circle. And I hope you found this really informative. We're going to go through a couple of examples. I'll give you just one particular part of a circle, and you can go many ways. And we're going to touch about that on our next video. Stay smart as always, and believe in yourselves.